Okay, so hello, this is Elsa, and today I have with me John O'Sullivan. We're both together very much on truth and facts, which fits with both of us because I care about the Truth Summit movement. And he is the founder, I believe, of Principia Scientific, Truth and Facts, Scientific Principles. So, hello, John, and welcome very much.
Thank you, Elsa. Pleasure to be here.
John, I'm not just interested in what you care about, I'm interested in how you got here. So, when you were a boy, what were you like? Were you already into science and truth and facts, or did you just play baseball?
Yeah, very much into typical boys things. The only thing that would put me apart from other boys was that I was very much a loner. Although I enjoy playing football and games with the boys, I would very much want to go to my room and read. I was very much into art, and I actually thought for many years I'd become an artist. I had no inclination to be involved in science, so it's quite unusual for me to have ended up working in the science field, but I'm enjoying it.
So, John the boy, if he met John the man right now, he'd be kind of surprised at how you turned out, it sounds like. Or not.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I'm not the person I thought I would be. When I was a young lad, I thought I would be a homebody. With very much had a good relationship with my mother. Very much into the family life. And I really thought being an introvert, I would not go far from home, but it was quite the opposite. Um, I went to university and ended up becoming a teacher, and that took me away from home. I moved away from my family, hundreds of miles from my family, and I realized I needed to move. It was doing me good. Um, my character was developing. From being an introvert and going into teaching, I learned to be more outgoing, and I felt that my self improvement was a big thing that I was into. Um, I'm a great believer in continual learning. All through my life, I've wanted to try new things, and I just kept changing. My direction in life from an early age is shifted. I never ever would have believed I would end up doing what I do now, and I think life has shaped me. The events in my life have shaped me. My focus has been altered through adversity, really. I've had a lot of adversity in my life. Um, I'm very lucky with my health, but I've never been very lucky in relationships. I've always struggled, and I think possibly due to the fact I may have been somewhat autistic. As I've got older, when I was young, there was no means at school of identifying autism like there is now, and especially when now you can do your own personality tests, and on the Myers-Briggs test, I found that fascinating. I did that a couple of years ago and found I was an INTJ,
Please
which is,
explain. Like,
yeah, the Myers-Briggs. Somebody said to me, a friend of mine said, you do strike me as being rather autistic. I'm not very mild, perhaps Asperger's. And I said, yeah, I think you might have something there because I'm very much into being on my own and reading and not all. I'm more comfortable on my own than a crowd. I always found being in a crowd a little bit threatening. So I did a test. I did the Myers-Briggs test that was recommended to me. And there's 16 personality types according to the test. One of them being the INTJ, which effectively boils down to the fact that my personality is introverted, intellectual leaning, intuitive, and judgmental. And those are what the initials basically stand for. So I have that characteristic, and sure enough, the INTJ profile suggests certain occupations. So one of the occupations was a writer, another one was a scientist, an architect, that kind of thing. Somebody self-driven and somebody self-reliant and independent-minded. And ironically, I've talked to colleagues that I work with now, and a few of them are also INTJ
Mm,
personality types. So perhaps there's something in this. I mean,
mm.
I don't tend to extrapolate and say everything is like this or not like that. But in my own case, anecdotally, I think I've wound up doing the right kind of job for me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm soon I'm going to be 60 years old, and I only really feel the last 10 years I've reached where I want to be in life in terms of the work I want to do, what drives me every day, what makes me get out of bed in the morning.
Well, what is
And
that?
just
What is that exactly? Because as a boy, you were a typical boy, sports and introversion and reading. So intellectual side, but also the physical, the playing, the all those outdoor things. And then you went into
very
teaching.
much, yes,
But
yeah, very much
but you
so.
didn't blossom in that. So what is it that you are
I
doing
know.
now, and how does that relate with this whole truth thing? When did you start seeing that the truth, as opposed to being what everyone was after, was something that huge parts of our society are dedicated to hiding?
Exactly. I felt after 5 years or more of teaching that I was becoming more uncomfortable with the politics, the petty politics. The national curriculum in the UK came in my early teaching years, and everything was prescribed. There was a lot of regimentation, and in my mind, I'm more of a rebel. I'm more of an anti-establishment figure, and I resented the fact that I was being told what to teach, and I didn't believe everything I was being told to teach. I kind of revolted against that. I was a bit of a rebel, and I had more conflicts with colleagues at work. I didn't keep in line. I didn't want to make the normal moves that people take to advance my career. I felt that I was going in the opposite direction, and I had to leave. Um, and what eventually happened for me was that, to cut a long story short, I was eventually involved in an issue with a false allegation. A student made a false allegation against me,
Hmm.
and I was arrested, criminally prosecuted by the police. And this took over a year to reach trial, and the allegations were completely false. And ironically, the person who accused me made a tape recording of a meeting with me, which was meant to be the evidence to prove my guilt. And it took many, many months to have a copy of that evidence handed over to my lawyer and me. And we eventually got a copy of the audio, plus a transcript from the police. And I was adamant that I'd done nothing wrong, that the tape would clear me. But when I read the transcript, it was very clear that I was, I was very evil. There was something done. I was physically abusive to this kid. And I said to my lawyer, this is not what happened. So we eventually sat down and listened to the audio, and there was a massive discrepancy. And we were shocked that a police transcript from the evidence of the audio was very different from reality. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I was a target. I was on somebody's target, being a teacher, a high profile individual, and my prosecution was front page news. It was all over the UK. School teacher attacks young girl, and the allegations were of a sexual nature, which made it even more of a new media story. So this was shocking to me. I was suspended from work without pay, and I had to go through the ordeal of a criminal trial. Um, and I became very involved in my own case. My lawyer suggested I plead guilty and just take a reprimand, a smack on the hand, but that would have ended my career, and I felt so bitter about this. And my desire to get the truth out was overpowering. I was going to go to trial, and I was going to present my case and show that the police and the prosecution were at the very minimum, totally incompetent, but at worst, they were corrupt. And sure enough, I went to court. I had 3 days in trial, and I was acquitted within 30 minutes. So I felt I vindicated myself. But from that moment on, I had a nervous breakdown. I think they called it post-traumatic stress disorder. It took me a year or two to recover. But from that moment on, I was adamant that I was going to fight corruption. There was a lot of people who wrote to me and shared with me their experience of police corruption. And the irony is that I was married to a police officer. I was married to a police officer for 6 years. So I had a viewpoint from both being a victim of false allegations and on the side of the police. And a term was put to me, a very interesting term called noble cause corruption. And what happens is, effectively, it's groupthink. What happens is an investigation goes such a way where people involved are so adamant they've got the right guy, the guilty party, they're going to push and push and push, and they become blind to the truth. And they'll ignore it, or they'll believe second-hand information from somebody they trust, that the authority figure they trust has told them, yes, he's guilty. And before you know it, corners have been cut, and an innocent man is accused and found guilty without trial. And this is what led me to believe that we extrapolate this to not just my own anecdotal experience, but across the board in society, we always tend to have a shortcut to appeal to authority. And I'm as guilty as anybody else. Too often I'll read a book and think, "Oh, that's wonderful," and use that as my Bible. And we have to be so careful. Once we have a mentality of groupthink, because it takes so much time to research and check things. It's very laborious to investigate a claim and to dig through all the evidence yourself. We're all busy people, and we do want to have a soundbite or two just to put us in the right direction. And I found this with global warming. When I came upon this in my teaching career, we were told to teach everybody that man-made greenhouse gases were heating up the atmosphere. We really needed to cut back our carbon footprint, and we were told that we were cursed, that we're not natural, that industrialization was a blight on nature. And I went along with this for many years, and ironically, it was a chance viewing of a TV program that changed my life, and that was watching a documentary on TV with Dr. Tim Ball. I'd never heard of Dr. Tim Ball, a climatologist in Canada. Mm-hmm. And on Channel 4 in the UK, I think it's 2006, 2007, there was an early evening documentary, 8 o'clock in the evening documentary, an hour-long documentary where climate skeptics were given a chance to air their views on man-made global warming. And there were top scientists, Professor Singer was one, Fred Singer, Tim Ball, Richard Linson, many other people revered in the skeptic community. They had their time to make their case, and I found it compelling. Because ironically, at the time I was looking to move home, and the issue for me at the time was sea level rise. At that time I was living near the coast, in East Anglia in England, in a beautiful part of the country called the Norfolk Broads. And that part of the country is barely above sea level, very, very much at threat if there was to be the predicted levels of sea rise. So I thought I need to investigate, and of course the alarmists were predicting 2, 3, 4, 5 feet sea level rises, and I thought, well, I'd be crazy to buy a property in that location. But then I found out all these politicians who were predicting the sea level rises were buying properties on the coast. So it didn't add up. So again, I made it my business to look into this. I thought, right, learn from what you learned from your police malfeasance prosecution. And yeah, sure enough, I dug deeper, and I became very committed and became a hardcore activist, really, a science writer, writing science articles about man-made global warming and about the greenhouse effect being fake. I wrote to Dr. Tim Ball, and I got to meet electronically rather than person to person, but as we are now, you got to meet people in the field, and they showed me where to look and where to read. And what was refreshing was they were saying to me, do your own research. You know, don't trust me, don't believe me, don't take my word. And I found that really heartening, that they weren't trying to preach. They were saying due diligence, you know. And the term due diligence has always stuck with me. You know, you need to take it on your own shoulders. You shouldn't trust everything you're told. And I built up a friendship with Tim Ball, and eventually Tim Ball and I we agreed to do a book together. And we recruited about a dozen other like-minded people, and that's where we got everything rolling. We began Principia Scientific, and Tim Ball and I were the co-founders. Yeah. I soon learned that Tim Ball was a very humble man. Tim Ball was not the outgoing extrovert type. He was more like me, quite introverted, not forthcoming, and also self-deprecating. He never claimed he knew all the answers. And again, it was something that I warmed to. And the friends he had, the colleagues that we built up a team of skeptics that were open-minded, and we had no financial agenda. We weren't paid to do what we were doing. We didn't plan to make money with what we were doing. We were doing it mainly from a strong conviction that this was wrong. Colleagues of mine had tried writing to politicians and tried to have a go at getting on TV or radio, and like Tim Ball said, it's very, very hard to break into the media and put forward a narrative that conflicts with the mainstream narrative. And we realised that, this was a massive operation, a global operation, to effectively brainwash people into believing only one version of reality. And it was based on flawed science. The greenhouse theory we found was a travesty. Being that we were working with applied scientists in chemical engineering and physics, who knew that carbon dioxide was only ever proven to cool anything. It was never, ever used to warm. It's one of the most effective refrigerant gases. It absorbs and re-emits heat in a nanosecond. It's literally, there's no way it could trap heat. And I've got these engineers saying, well, I work with CO2. CO2 doesn't trap heat. There's no way CO2 could warm the planet. And this kind of argument from an applied science point of view was up against a computer model, effectively academics and universities, who had no experience or very little experience of thermodynamics. They were called out on this. They were called out and said, can you verify some empirical evidence to prove that carbon dioxide does something unique in the atmosphere that it doesn't do anywhere else? And all they could do was refer to a trapped gas experiment, a flawed experiment, which effectively was a sealed unit where you could heat a unit and put carbon dioxide in it, and then extrapolate from that, saying, well, there you go, it traps the heat. Well, that's perverse logic. The Earth, for example, is an open system. The planet doesn't have a lid on it. The free movement of energy through the atmosphere from the sun. So the experiment relied on to prove the so-called greenhouse effect was in no way related to how the atmosphere really worked. And we found that every time we tried to corner these people and pin them down to specifics, they would shift the goalposts, and it was very dodgy. And we found that he became more outspoken, and Dr. Tim Ball, called out one of the top UN climate scientists, Dr. Michael Mann, on this issue, and
Hmm.
effectively called him a fraud. In effect, he said that Michael Mann, the lead author on the most important pivotal climate science paper, the hockey stick graph, it was the iconic image used in the third IPCC report in 2001, and it was a travesty. It was a mockery of science. It was effectively using numbers in a very convoluted way to make a very spurious argument that tree rings could prove the past temperatures. And what Mann had done was splice onto his graph, which was a proxy graph of so-called historic temperature rises using tree rings, which is not reliable, a temperature graph from thermometers of the last 100 years without really showing that he'd done this. And Tim Ball challenged him to show his data.
Mm-hmm.
We come back to what our key argument is: if you make a claim, effectively, Mann was overturning the accepted science because he was claiming there was no medieval warm period. And Dr. Ball told me, well, every climatologist going back 30, 40, 50 years would accept there was a medieval warm period when temperatures were warmer than today. But Mann had erased that. He'd used his tree ring proxy graph to remove that warm period because it was inconvenient. You know, if you've got temperatures warmer in the medieval period than today, then there's no argument that there's dangerous warming happening today. So it came to the point where Mann was so angered by Tim Ball that he sued him. He took out a libel lawsuit in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
in British Columbia, and this dragged on for 8 years. We had a hell of a time raising money for Tim's legal fees, and but Tim was adamant that he wouldn't back down. And sure enough, we argued all the way through that Mann would not show his data, and the key was the R2 regression numbers, the numbers that he used to verify his claims, and he never actually released those verification numbers. And Tim eventually won a dismissal of the claim on the basis that Mann wouldn't pursue his claim any further. So the judge awarded all costs to Tim Ball, and this was in August 2019. And Mann has never paid the costs. You know, he refused to pay. So not only did he lose his case, but in a very sour grapes move, he's refused to honour the law that he sought to pursue. So we're now left with this. These guys, these scientists are funded by big corporations. You know yourself that the claims are that governments are corrupt. And moving on to the current pandemic, it's
How
very
have you
hard.
how have you managed to survive in all this? As a teacher, I know how you survived. Teachers get handed salary. Here, you're on the outside. You do not have access to lots of government funding. You do not generally have $35,000 a pop speaking engagements.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so you did not get that.
No, 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 no. We're accused of being funded by big oil. We've always been accused of being funded by big corporations, but don't get a penny. All our funding is grassroots. We literally get dribs and drabs, $5 here, $10 there, from ordinary people who uh, is worth listening to. That we have an argument that's worth putting out there, and we scrape by. You know, this is what we do. We scrape by. We were able to raise $100,000 for Dr. Ball in the first month when Michael Mann filed his lawsuit, but his case became known to the billionaire Bob Mercer. Bob Mercer made his money on the New York Stock Exchange, a very smart guy, and I believe that he assisted by donating $600,000 or $700,000 to the cause. So, but for Mr. Mercer, I'm not sure we could have got through this case. And this is what it boils down to. We have to find like-minded people with the means to fund what we do to really be effective. I mean, it's great having grassroots support, but when you're up against governments or corporations, the David Suzuki Foundation, so forth, you've got the UN, you've got, where I am now, the British government are very, very into promoting this agenda. It's almost impossible to take them on. And to leap forward and talk about the current pandemic, for example, the narrative is very much one way. There's no room for dissent. There's so much investment in pushing forward a vaccine answer to the so-called pandemic, and everybody's invested in this. And for people to own up to the fact it may not be certain, that it may be spurious or it may be invalid, or even fraudulent, these are things that can't be countenanced. So it's a very difficult juggernaut to turn around. And climate science is very much like big pharma in the medical industry. Once you have an agenda, it's very, very difficult to have an impact on a debate where you're saying something that's too easily dismissed as conspiracy theory. It's a shocking get out of jail free card that you find the media use all the time. They'll just dismiss you as a conspiracy theorist, and you can present evidence, but they won't allow the evidence to be shown on their media, on their news channel or whatever. So you really are expecting ordinary people to come and check you out. Come and view what we show, and as much as we can, we cite government data. There's nothing better than using the evidence that they use against you to prove them wrong. And this is why my bad experience in a criminal case was such an epiphany for me, where physical evidence of a tape recording, which was strong, the key police evidence against me, was what I used. I turned it against them, and because I turned their evidence against them, they had no comeback. And I think that's what's happening now with the pandemic. We have so much data now pumped out by governments since last January, February, throughout the year, about the pandemic, about the mortality rates, about the infection rates, that anybody can go through that data. And the shocking fact is that, especially in the US, we're seeing that the excess mortality rate is unexceptional. 2020 mortality rates are very much in line with previous years. And yet the media projects this narrative of a deadly virus that's killing thousands of people. So it just shows you how effective the media propaganda machine can be.
One of the things I have learned from 2006 to the present is that then I just thought one had to get heard. What I was becoming aware of then was Islam, supposedly a religion of peace. Then I did the scientific thing of looking at the religion, Quran, and the history. And I went, oops, mistake has been made. Let me just show you the truth. Have you had an evolution over the last 2 decades or so regarding what I've just mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's true that as a teacher working in a government state system of education, where you have a national curriculum, we were not only indoctrinated to push forward a greenhouse gas theory of man-made global warming, we were also taught to promote multiculturalism. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing I found is that the vilification of white men. I found that I was a target. I was always thought to be a threat, a danger, and I really felt this when I was accused of attacking a young girl. That I was shocked, because it was just assumed that as a man I was more of a threat than a woman. And you're talking about a religious side. I can see bias in terms of gender, bias in terms of age, where a young girl is. Oh, why would a young girl lie? This man is a mature man. He's been grooming her. there's so many cards to play that are just inherently biased, and it's a subtle brainwashing taking place. And I find that most people they don't have the critical reasoning skills to scratch the surface and question the narratives being presented. And so I do agree with what you're saying about the misrepresentation of certain religions. If you're a Catholic, if you're a Christian, you are more likely to be abused. We have this, perhaps with all good intentions, that this idea of multicultural, welcoming other cultures. It, to some people, it becomes very sinister because you realise that you're demoting your own culture, and it's not about equality anymore. It's about choosing a side, which side you put above the other. And unfortunately, that was never the intention. I think a lot of good intentions are being coerced or subverted, and I think we're all caught up in this now. I think we're all caught up in this. There's a multi-dimensional war going on, where a war of ideas. Some of us are very well intentioned. Some of us are badly intentioned. Like, for example, going back to my police case, having been married to a police officer, I know full well 80% of police officers are honourable people. I wasn't poisoned by the fact two or three decided to attack me. There's always a bad apple here and there. And I think we latch on to the negativity, and we make scapegoats of people. And too often it's the divide and rule. I think divide and rule has been a tool, has been a strategy of those in power for too long. And we are all set against each other. It's too often the case that somebody who, for example, supports the environment is put above somebody who says, well, I believe in laissez-faire, I believe in free will, I believe in free choice, and these are conflicting perspectives. Where one person's free will is another person's abuse of the planet, or what have you. Religious freedom to some people is an affront to Islam. There's so many different ways of looking at it, and there's never any real easy way to resolve it.
Actually, we're going to disagree on this because I've long been an ethics prof, and one of the first things you have to teach is priorities. So religious freedom is one priority. The right to tell the truth is a higher priority for me. So and then you have to find a way to, okay, why is truth a higher priority when this religion says it's not? Well, then you can go to John Stuart Mill's Liberty Until Harm. You can show how limiting liberty does harm. So if you give religious freedom priority over truth, then you allow the Aztec religion to flourish, cutting out lots of young men's hearts here and there. So I don't actually think it's very hard, but I think that, in fact, what I would say here is that you have not been given the tools for showing what is a priority. Though you're very much an intellectual, you're very much science and truth-minded, most people haven't been given the tools, I would say intentionally, so we can think our way out. Instead, we're supposed to not judge and not be judgmental. So we're taught what I call fact claims instead of facts. But anyway, there you are. I'm interested, how did that broadening happen? What turning points were there in the last 20 years from starting to be concerned about climate change? What have your turning points been?
I'm coming from a diplomatic, less confrontational perspective, but I'm looking to avoid conflict. I don't want to set people at war with each other, and as you say quite rightly, that the higher goal is to find the truth rather than be into appeasing others. Appeasement is no long-term solution. You have to find the truth. The truth itself is elusive. I think we find the truth more by ruling out what's not true, because it's very hard to identify the truth. But we can more easily find what's false. And I think that's what I've been doing through my life, is finding out what's false, and by chipping away at things that don't add up, that I know that make me angry or make me feel uncomfortable, and trying to resolve it at an intellectual level. And I think then you begin to realise that you've successfully exposed a lie. And that's what experience shows you. You need to go through that pain, that conflict, cognitive dissonance, if you like. You need to go through that, and it's a learning curve we're all on, and we all come from different perspectives, and some of us have it perhaps easier than others. As I said, I can, in a nutshell, put it down to my criminal prosecution, where I had an epiphany then about the clear black and white issues of exposing the truth and exposing a lie. And I proved my innocence by showing a falsity, showing a fraud. And I think that that's crystallized in my mind that the way to success is sometimes chipping away at falsity. And the service to science, my colleagues and I, we know we're not adding to science, but we're kind of subtracting from it by taking out a false theory. And that in itself is a service. That's a progression. Finding out that we can refute the greenhouse gas theory successfully is a service to science. It's a false direction that science took 30, 40 years ago. And we've adamantly proven, empirically, that carbon dioxide, it cannot trap heat or warm the planet. And people will say, well, that's a negative. Yeah, but a negative in the service of science is a positive. So I try and look at it that way, and it's the same thing with the work we do at the moment with the pandemic. A lot of it is apparently negative science. We're proving a negative, or we're exposing a negative. But as I say, we're chipping away at the falsity, and what's left at the end is the bare bones that can be called the truth. And I think that's what we can do is in our humble way.
That's very, very interesting. I hadn't thought of that before. That you were chipping away at untruth rather than aiming to establish a truth. That is very interesting way of what you have been doing. Then you come to possibly something else as the truth, or we've got these other hypotheses. Where do you see yourself now, and where do you see yourself going? You've started the Principia Scientific. That is growing and developing. Whom are you involved with? Where do you see it evolving? What do you see its usefulness?
Yeah, I think already we validated that the scientific work in a legal context. As I said, we were able to apply our scientific arguments in a court of law, in the British Columbia Supreme Court, and there are other cases in the pipeline, and not so much in climate science, but now in the medical field, where we have worked with experts in medical science, like our friend Dr. Saeed Qureshi. Saeed Qureshi has had a long, distinguished career with Health Canada, and right now he's put forward a very rigorous scientific argument that says that the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, hasn't been isolated. It doesn't have a gold standard. And if there's no gold standard, if you can't verify the existence of this virus, how can you have a vaccine for it? You can't have a vaccine for something that you haven't proven that actually exists in science. And this is a major issue that a lot of people have overlooked. People have focused on side issues. I think a lot of it is misdirection. People have talked about how the severity of this virus, and it's obfuscated by the fact that the symptoms are very much aligned with what you get in a flu, or a bad cold, or any generic coronavirus. Coronaviruses have been known for many, many years. This is nothing new. The fact that it's claimed as a novel coronavirus, COVID-19, it's only by terminology. It exists by terminology, but the fact it doesn't exist in a petri dish, that it can be isolated and reproduced. We talk about Koch's postulates. Dr. Saeed Qureshi says we must try to apply Koch's postulates. That is an international benchmark of where you verify the existence of a disease, a pathogen. And we found that every time we look for a new paper that claims to have found COVID-19, they haven't abided by Koch's postulates.
Please explain.
Yeah, I mean, Koch's postulates, the requirement is that you have to have an infected biological material. For example, you can take a sample from somebody who's symptomatic. You can take a swab or a bit of biological material. You put it in a petri dish. This is an infected bit of biological material. What you do is you can multiply it using the so-called PCR test. You then, you've got it purified then, and what you do is you've now identified this, purified it. You then introduce that sample into a guinea pig. The guinea pig is usually, obviously, an animal. Now, if that animal, who then is administered with the virus sample, then develops the symptoms of the illness, and you then take from that animal another sample, which then matches the very first sample you had under a microscope, you've proven the existence of a novel virus. However, that has not been done. The coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, has not applied that procedure. And we've tried to find evidence of any lab doing this, and we can't find proof of this. It's all on computers. What they've been using is what's often described as remnants. There's remnants of DNA. For example, the analogy that some people have used is like if you go to a scrapyard and you find a Mercedes hubcap, you find a Mercedes steering wheel, and you find a tyre that could belong to a Mercedes, it doesn't mean you've got a Mercedes car. And this is the precise analogy with this virus. Just because you've got remnants that might be part of that vehicle or whatever, it doesn't mean you've verified it. And I think people who are non-scientists can be misdirected or confused. This is something, again, it's a playbook used in climate science again and again to persuade people that we've resolved it. The experts know, just listen to the experts. When these experts are often contradictory and they don't have the evidence to show.
So what direction do you see? Do you have a clear sense of direction?
On the broad level, universities, the education systems in most countries are being exposed as being corrupted. Education, formal education, universities are more in the service of government or big donors. There's a financial motive, whereas we're grassroots and we're independent. We have no agenda. All we want to do is be like the sentinel, the watch, the guard on duty. We're providing an alternative. Some people have thrown out the analogy of the blue team versus the red team. There's not enough of this adversarial approach in science. Too much people jump on the bandwagon and then they push forward with the agenda and never look to a conflicting viewpoint. So I think we're reactionary in that sense. We're reactionary to mainstream narratives. We're kind of anti-establishment. But the lawsuits themselves, they were a convenient tool insofar as most people can relate to a judgment in court. The preponderance of the evidence. There's legal arguments that say the truth of the evidence, the facts are weighed on a scale, the scales of justice. On the one side you see a weaker case, on the other side you see a stronger case. We believe in that rationale, and we believe in weighing evidence, and so we are followers, we're reactionary rather than leaders. We're going back to this analogy I said, we're chipping away at falsity. And I think we want to add to a new paradigm where education is done more self-directed learning, I think, is the way to go. Less formal. I think with the internet is an amazing resource. Perhaps we see PSI, Principia, growing as a repository of knowledge. The open reviews that we have, we publish articles, we invite criticism. Everything is above board. We welcome dissent, and we like that kind of gradual chipping away at the falsity. And I think perhaps that would be a new educational paradigm away from formal indoctrination in universities, where you have to tick boxes and you have to comply with an agenda. The way we're doing it, it's the other way around. It's self-centered learning. You come from yourself, you bring your own ideas, you test them yourself. It's kind of empowering the individual again, and I think that's the important thing.
I think that's really interesting. I'm going to say, I've heard somebody else say something similar about getting rid of the universities, etc. I come from having loved my university experience. It exposed me to a world so much larger than my very boring high school world. I took comparative religion, genetics, anthropology, philosophy, child psychology, Shakespeare, huge array, and so much was laid out for me. It also laid out a course of study for comparative religion where somebody who was really, I remember that was eye-opening. I had no idea about the Epic of Gilgamesh. I had no idea about the evolution of religions. It was fantastic. So I appreciated what I got, which was professors giving things out. So I liked the organized knowledge on the basis you're talking about of inquiry and discovery. I hate what has been done to it, where it's organized indoctrination. I wasn't told which philosopher to agree with. Do you see that it might be possible to save the universities by clearing out the debris rather than throwing them out?
Yeah, I'm pragmatic about this. I'm a great believer in letting things evolve naturally. I'm not one that wants to impose an order. I think it's so difficult to come up with a master plan and then implement it. You have to be so omniscient, omnipresent. You have to be a master of everything to come up with the grand plan that you then impose on everybody. I think nature's very good at finding its own answers, and I think we're part of nature. And as a collective, we eventually find the answers. I watched a very interesting video yesterday where somebody, social scientist, presented the argument that usually it's the wisdom of the crowd that takes us forward. And you can't deny the wisdom of the crowd. You just have to find ways of bringing forward the information that we all rise up. We all have to rise up collectively. And I don't think we know a perfect means of doing this. The university system has gone so far, but now everybody's got a degree. When I was in my 20s, it was the rarity to have a degree, and I think when you have mass education, the quality can go down. That's an argument. I think there's an argument that says there's a levelling down and not a levelling up that's taken place over the last 20 years or 30 years. And I think we have to be mindful of that. We want people to be better educated, but what are they educated in? Mm-hmm. What are they valuing in? It's the intrinsic value of what they're learning. And I think it all comes back to being a critical reasoning thing. I think if you're going to teach anything, you shouldn't be teaching facts. You should be teaching critical reasoning skills. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we need to value. It's like the old saying, you teach a man to fish and he fishes for life. Give him a fish, he eats for a day. You have to, as you said before, it's about the tools, tooling up. And there's no better tool that you can have than have critical reasoning. You have that tool and you've got it for life.
And you're very much doing that with what you're doing, and you're also, it sounds like, open-ended. You have a certain direction where you're going, but you don't know exactly where you're headed, your life or the organization or the videos or everything. Would you like to have some last words for people? Anything, final thing that you'd like to say to leave people with?
I would just say be optimistic. I feel extremely optimistic. I know we've had a difficult year. 2020 was an awful year in many respects, but I think it's a turning point. I think it's a watershed year. It's a watershed year because corruption's being exposed, malfeasance is being exposed, people are waking up. And I genuinely believe something very good will come from this year. And we've been through hell, but having been through this hell, I'm hopeful that we'll take that knowledge and take it forward and be stronger and more aware, where before we lacked that awareness and been overly trustful of authority. So I'm very optimistic. I say my message is stay optimistic and keep being critical, push self-learning, self-direction, trust yourself, and be confident.
That's great. Thank you very much, John.